Well, last year, in the guise of the Adelaide Show podcast, I answered a number of questions from a high school student in South Australia about podcasting. And I also am working with another student now from a different school. Again, I'm not naming names because of privacy, but you know who you are. Um, I thought what I'd do is wear a different hat from the talked about marketing perspective for four follow-up questions that weren't covered in those initial videos. So here they are, the four questions about podcasting. The first one is, what strategies have you found effective for growing your podcast's listener base? Well, in the early days, if I think of the Adelaide Show podcast, when we were fighting the fight to stop people labeling Adelaide as boring, Twitter actually used to be a good place to be, not the cesspool of negativity that it's become now. And so we would actively have segments like the um, we had a judge and jury segment, the Visa Council, where we would scour Twitter for people talking about Adelaide and labeling it boring, and the three of us would have this mini segment, like a court, where we would read out the tweet, name the person, discuss among ourselves whether or not they were making valid criticisms or they were just flying off the handle and doing the lazy labeling. And then we would vote whether they would get an Adelaide visa to maintain their life here safely or have their visa rejected and be asked to leave. And then we would have a big stamp sound effect, and the job was done. But then we would follow up with them and tweet publicly their findings and let them know the news. That direct um, interaction with the public profiles of listeners, obviously never, or not even listeners, just citizens in South Australia, um, that was really effective because people are curious that they've been talked about on a podcast. So they get this thing, they've been hauled before the Adelaide Visa Council, and then they go to listen, then their friends, plus it's being talked about, etc. So that sort of direct interaction was a great way to build the base. Plus, by making sure that we tackled stories that or topics that had grassroots followings, like even pub Scrabble was a great one that got people talking. The local pizza bar, Ross Trevor Pizza Bar, local to us, where Gaetano had been standing behind that counter for 30 years, it was known by everyone. That went nuts. So touching topics and people who themselves are well connected authentically with a community of interest to you, that certainly help. With podcasts we're producing under Talked About Marketing's banner, our Talking About Marketing podcast is not one that we proactively push out there. It's actually made so that David Olney and I have a rationale for our reading. We read a lot, and this is an outlet for us to think out loud about what we've read and apply it to small business marketing. But This Medical Life, um, by creating a resource that helps GPs everywhere by talking to the experts in dealing with particular illnesses, uh, that has proven to be very popular, a way of spreading the word. And we even had Paralympian Janine Watson on recently. She had been referred to our podcast because she has MS. We did an episode on MS, and from there became a huge fan and heard a follow-up interview about the brain bank and ended up talking to the head of the brain bank, spurred on by things she learned from us. So then she actively talks about our podcast elsewhere and it grows organically. So I think that is a long answer, but it's making sure we're connecting with authentic communities of interest. Do you gather feedback from your listeners and how does it influence your future episodes? Um, Interesting. With the Adelaide Show, it really is my gift to the community. It's me still having a chance to work in radio, even though I'm not working in radio actively anymore. and without having a producer or a boss telling me what should or shouldn't be in it. So it really follows my instinct. We have done some surveys from time to time, and that does help. But I have often likened the quote that was attributed to Henry Ford, who said, if you asked customers what they wanted, you would have had a faster horse rather than a car, because it's not necessarily the role of the consumer to be the innovator. I think we have to take that responsibility and have that guts. I just finished listening to um, the Woody Allen autobiography, and with his movies, he would never read any critical feedback. He would just do what he wanted to fulfill his artistic vision. And that advice came to him from someone else who's well respected in the industry. And I think there's a degree where that is applicable. That said, um, we do often get listeners say, "Hey, you've done this. Can you please tackle this topic, or what do you think of that?" And definitely, we take that under consideration. So, do we gather feedback? Yes, formally, sometimes informally, most of the time. But I think making sure that we have a strong editorial position. So I will often get some ideas, especially for the Adelaide show, that just don't fit. This is about putting the passion of South Australia on centre stage. And so if there's no direct link to South Australia, if it's not someone pursuing a passion, this is not, my podcast is not an outlet just for the people doing the circuit as guests because they want to boost their public speaking credentials. That's not what it's for. It's got to resonate deeply with my curiosity about South Australians and uh, those who are doing their endeavour. Why South Australians? Because we're here, and that was the focus we chose. There are plenty of Aussies and other people with great interest elsewhere, but we need to have some boundaries to make our editorial stance valid. What is the most important lesson you've learned through your podcasting journey? Probably the most important lesson is don't think that getting a big name on your podcast will lead to lots of listeners. And I think I've worked out why. People with a big name are already saturated, uh, generally speaking. And so why go and hear them talk again? Why actively seek that out? Even our beloved Adelaide Lord Mayor Jane Lomax Smith, it was wonderful having her on. It marked our 400th episode, but it didn't skyrocket the numbers because she's on the news every day. She's very active in social media. People have a sense or an assumption they've already heard everything she has to say. And that I think applies to big names. So that was the biggest thing I've learned is big names do not equal big numbers. It's the topic of interest, the angle that you're coming at it from. And if you go back and give your younger self one piece of advice about podcasting, what would it be? Well, possibly getting the podcasts onto YouTube, because there are people who live among us who don't even watch the podcast, but they like listening to podcasts on YouTube. Really weird. I'd probably try and incorporate that in some way, shape, or form. What else with the podcast? I think here's the thing. I'm going to flip the question. The thing that I would pat younger self on the back and say is stay true to the whatever the rationale is for doing it. So I did the Adelaide show to get out of the house and to do something proactive for the community and sate my curiosity about different people doing different things. So that was great. For talking about marketing, the focus is not to be a world-killing podcast that saturates the airwaves. It was to create an external sense of discipline that I must read at least a book a week in our field or related fields, to push myself to keep bringing new ideas to the fore. And so by publicly saying there's another episode coming out, I have to stay true to that. And it's this external discipline. The other thing I would say is the podcasts that I think are the most effective when you're not part of a major radio network, and so you get free publicity, and you're not a TV um, TV star that has their own following automatically. It's servicing a community. So if, in the realm of business, if you are going to go deep into all the intricacies of, say, pool heating, if that's what your business is in, then that's going to be of interest, or car restoring, or cake decorating, whatever it might be. Stay true to that and go as deep and as surprising as possible with the things that you cover. And you will find that there's a group of people around you who love what you say and look up to you and start giving you kudos for being out there and helping them, and being so generous with that time. And the payoff comes indirectly as a result of that: being known, being sought out, being asked to appear at places, being sent sample products, being given experiences you wouldn't normally get. So being true to an audience. And if you are going to go to try and be mass celebrity, then you've just got to, I think, lower your standards on some way and just go lowest common denominator. But it's a pretty cutthroat end of the spectrum. I'm not, and different personalities will cope with that in different ways. It's not how I'm cut out. I see the power here of that intimate connection between you and a group of people who are interested in the field or the topic you've chosen to cover. I hope that helps. They're a bit rambly, but I wanted to make sure I got it done for you.